Thank you very much, Peter. This is, as you'll see, Peter's name is also on this, as he was a co-author and a partner on this. So I'll be talking about interventions to ensure follow-up with positive fit, an international survey of screening programs. So in terms of conflicts of interest, I do not have any commercial conflicts of interest. Um, and these data have been published. So if you're interested, you could go online and see the more full results. But so I don't need to really go through this in much detail because you've already seen this several times. But low rates of follow-up colonoscopy after positive fit can be a problem. And one of the things that we found most interesting is that there aren't really specific guidelines regarding. So there are European guidelines that talk about 30 days in terms of time to colonoscopy, but there is very little about how to ensure follow-up. And as Lucinda mentioned earlier, there's relatively little data in this area. So we were curious to find out what had evolved so that programs, what they were already doing just pragmatically to try to make sure that people come in for positive fit. And just a few of the sort of my favorite references about why colonoscopy delays after positive fit are important. So colonoscopy delays lead to an increased risk of advanced cancer. This is analysis, of 70,000 fit positive patients. And what we can see is that when you get into the 7 to 12 or more than 12-month range, you have an increased chance of having increased odds of having cancer. And even more important, you have an increased chance of having advanced stage cancer, which is more difficult to treat. And this is data from Manuel Zorzi that's still in review, but showing in terms of colorectal cancer mortality over a whole 10 years of follow-up among people in the Venice program who either were compliers with colonoscopy or were non-compliers. And as you can see, the cumulative colorectal cancer mortality is far higher among people who don't comply with colorectal cancer. And finally, in a case control study done by Chaik Dubeni, you can see the odds ratio of colorectal cancer death. And well, this is a relatively rare cause of colorectal cancer death. If you compare between people who have died of colorectal cancer, and if you look among those who have died and who haven't, this failure of follow-up is actually leads to a 7.3 times higher odds of death. So in terms of the methods for the current study, what we did was a cross-sectional electronic survey of screening program. We sent an email to program leadership in April 2019. If you can remember the world before COVID, this was then, with one reminder and additional requests for clarifications afterwards. The questionnaire had 20 questions. It asked about program type, fit positive follow-up goals, and whether people, what proportion of people with positive fit got to colonoscopy at different times of follow-up. We ended up focusing on 6 months after the positive fit. And then we asked what interventions used to increase fit positive follow-up. And if programs had it, results stratified by race and socioeconomic status. In terms of results, so 35 of 58 programs responded, 60%. I think the WEO colorectal cancer committee support was very important for this. So there were 28 organized and 7 opportunistic programs. There were 20 national, 8 regional, and 7 local programs. 26 of the programs offer FIT or guaiac FOBT only, with 1 offering FIT and sigmoidoscopy, and 8 offering FIT and colonoscopy. And the size of the program varied enormously. As you can see, there were some very small with just 2,000 people screened annually, up to 8.5 million people screened annually. So some of the descriptive results. So in terms of colonoscopy cost and target, colonoscopy completion at 6 months. So this is among people with a positive fit. If you look 6 months out, what proportion have gotten a colonoscopy? This ranged, there was a very large range. So for between 39% and 100% with a mean of 79%. That was not weighted to the size of the program, however. Colonoscopy was offered free of charge in 24 to 35 programs, and the cost varied otherwise between $10 and $200. This is converted into US dollars. In terms of the target time from test result to colonoscopy, it was very interesting because this ranged from 2 weeks to within the fiscal year. But as you can see, 27 had a goal of 3 months or less. So that was by far the most common. And then, so in this table, there's quite a bit of information, but I'll walk you through it. The first column here just says what number of programs implemented each intervention. So this is out of 35. So as you can see, half of programs notified patients by mail, another 10 notified patients by telephone. These weren't mutually exclusive. One of the really interesting thing I thought was that 20 out of 35, so almost 60%, used some form of patient navigators. As I'll discuss later, this looks very different in different areas. Then, as mentioned previously about offering colonoscopy free of charge. Then, in terms of notifying primary care providers of results, that was the most common. And then sending reminders to primary care providers or even giving performance data on colonoscopy completion. Finally, in terms of system level interventions, the most common here was having a registry to track FIT positive patients, and a few used automated referral to endoscopists. Then you can see here what we did here was just very simply without controlling for other factors, we just compare the difference in means between programs who had this intervention or did not. Because we only had 35 programs and we had a very large number of interventions, we did not do adjusted analyses, but we just did a very simple comparison of means. And so the two types of interventions that came out the most prominently was the use of patient navigators and sending reminders to primary care providers when no colonoscopy was completed. So how does this look in practice? So I'm going to show two examples of the two programs that I know well. One is a big program, so Kaiser Permanente in Northern California, that has about 1 million eligible people per year. And then a small program in the canton of Vaud, though the canton of Vaud has about 180,000 people who are eligible each year. It's a relatively new program in an area with a lot of opportunistic screening. So the number of people with FIT positives remains relatively small. So this is looking at Kaiser Permanente, Northern California. And so Kaiser Permanente has about 20,000 positive FIT to follow up every year that are spread over 14 service areas. So because of this very large number of positive FIT over many different service areas, they've had to develop a very systematic approach to this. And what they do is that they start with actually telephone contacts to patients. So patients, primary care providers are notified first, who can then try to contact the patient and make a referral. But actually the responsibility for FIT positive follow-up is by the gastroenterology departments. And if they can contact the patient, then they give the result and they schedule an appointment directly during that phone call. So one of the things that's really interesting is that by having the gastroenterology departments do these phone calls, they can make appointments directly on the phone at that moment. There's no extra step. And then actually they've implemented a lot of organizational supports. So they have a system-wide goal of colonoscopy follow-up within 30 days. Even though actually the actual colonoscopy completion at 30 days is not close to 100%, they've chosen that goal to try to put through the message that this is a priority to be done quickly. They've hired a lot of extra endoscopists to make sure that they, throughout the year, have adequate colonoscopy capacity. They have a registry of FIT positive patients. And then in their gastroenterology departments, they have designated staff members who are responsible for week after week looking at this registry, who hasn't gotten a colonoscopy, what's been done, what can be done. And then something that's interesting that can be done in an integrated health system is that there are actually financial rewards, not to individual physicians, but to medical centers for maintaining adequate colonoscopy access. What does this look like in a much, much smaller, so orders of magnitude smaller scale? So in 2019, in the canton where I work in Switzerland, we had 225 positive fit. We have a target follow-up of 3 months. The European guideline is for 30 days, but we felt that the data supports negative outcomes after 6 months, and that pragmatically 3 months made no sense. In 2019, we had 82% colonoscopy completion at 6 months and greater than 90% at 12 months. This is with having patients and providers notified of results by mail. And then primarily it's general practitioners or primary care providers who are responsible for the positive tests. We send reminders to them. We don't actually follow up directly with patients. However, we do have a central registry and we do track every single positive fit. And we do assume ultimate responsibility. And in rare cases, we have reached out to patients directly to try to figure out what's happening. So in terms of findings from the survey and what I was just speaking about with 2 examples, as I mentioned, non-adherence with colonoscopy after positive fit has important clinical consequences. Interventions associated with higher compliance are the use of primary care provider reminders and patient navigators. And then actually one of the things I didn't mention was that a greater overall number of interventions was also associated with a better follow-up. Though the implementation of these interventions looks very different depending on the size and complexity of a program. One of the things to mention about patient navigators that I forgot to mention when I was talking about Kaiser Permanente is that in the studies about patient navigators, it's typically been trained nurses who are often even trained in motivational interviewing. Whereas at Kaiser Permanente, they call it patient navigators, but most of them are actually telephone operators or medical assistants who have been dedicated more to telephone follow-up. And from my experience, they do a great job of getting people on the phone and using scripts to try to explain why even if they had a hemorrhoid, they still need to get follow-up and all these things. In terms of implications, I really do believe that the proportion of fit positive patients who get a colonoscopy is an important quality metric for programs. I think that we sometimes focus too much on screening rates and not enough on fit positive follow-up. This is my own hypothesis to try to generate some discussion, but I think that reasonable targets would be that even though most colonoscopies should get done within 2 or 3 months, that we should aim to have greater than 80% colonoscopy completion in 6 months. I was really happy to see Lucinda's data from the Netherlands showing what proportion of people had or didn't have a medical contraindication, to show that probably 90% colonoscopy completion is realistic, knowing that there will be close to 10% of people with a contraindication. And additional research, in my opinion, is needed to better define best practices for patient navigators and who can, what types of roles of people can be on the phone to call these people with positive fit, and then how to improve messaging for providers to when sending reminders or just in terms of trying to inform them about their patients who aren't getting follow-up. Great, thank you very much. And also thank you to the co-authors on this, including Carlos Senore, Martin Wong from Hong Kong, Fola May, who's based in Los Angeles, Samir Gupta, who's in San Diego, and Peter Liang, who's in New York. And thank you for everybody listening, especially all of you in Europe, where it's Friday evening at 7 or 8 p.m. and you might have more fun things to do. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I'm obviously biased, but I thought that was a great study. We have a question from Linda Rabnik. Any comments on digital navigation that is using cell phones? Do you think this works?
Yeah, great question. There's actually been a couple interesting startups in the US that have specifically used sort of remote text messaging to see if there's a way to try to trigger people multiple times during this period after a positive fit, to specifically kind of coach them about colonoscopy prep, to try to keep them contact with them to make sure that they make it to the colonoscopy. I think it's promising. Maybe others on this call, one of the great things with these WEO, there's so many experts. I haven't seen myself specific studies about that more sort of automated or remote following up.